Welcome back to the Master's Apprentice. We are actually on part 2 of a conversation about silence and solitude. If you didn't watch the first half of this, please click up here somewhere and go back and watch that one first, of what silence and solitude is as a spiritual discipline. But now we're going to dive into some more practical aspects of that, maybe what that has looked for us or hasn't looked like for us. Maybe starting off with the difficulties of doing this in the winter.
Yes, definitely. Here in Oregon, super nice. Spring, summer, fall, pretty mild. It's just really tough to find something in winter that's not. You alluded to having some indoor spot, but I have yet to figure it out here, a good spot to go in the winter. So curious what you found.
Well, I haven't necessarily, but we were at so we have, in our town, we have a YMCA that's also a library. So it's a Y library combined. And we haven't been there too many times, but we recently were checking it out the other day. And we went to the library, and we're walking through the library. And in the corner of the library, there was 2, maybe 3 rooms, and more like booths, that were like soundproof rooms for studying. And there was a little tablet like next to the door, like a screen, where you could reserve times for the study room at the library. Well, there's many things about that are not ideal, but if you're just looking for a place that's warm and checks the boxes of silent and by yourself, I was just realizing that might be a viable option for myself to consider. And I don't know what that looks like in other areas or other towns, if other libraries have something similar. But I would say in general, a library could be a viable option, even if it doesn't have a room of extra silence.
Sure.
It is going to be a warm place, and it's going to be quiet.
Yeah.
It's not an ideal. I know, especially for me, Dustin, it's not ideal because, especially when I'm praying, I prefer to walk as opposed to remain still. And yeah, so I'll say that with that. I prefer to have the option to be able to walk, is how I should say that. But when your options are limited, because the problem with like a coffee shop, for instance, is that it's not going to be quiet.
No, definitely not.
And so this is what I was going to mention, like my asterisk to music. If your only option is something like a coffee shop in the winter seasons, then I would recommend putting some worship music on and some headphones. Once again, that's not ideal, but if you can't actually be in a place that's silent, then you have those options as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I was thinking of, was the library thing, which is a viable
That's not a bad
option
idea.
if you're
I
going to
mean,
be indoors.
I know we have those rooms here as
Nice.
well at the library. So
I had never
maybe
seen
it's
that.
more
That's a new
common.
thing. Maybe it is. I'd never seen that before. This was the first time I'd seen that. And the first thing I thought of was Silence. I saw it and went, Silence of Solitude. It was like the first. They have booths for Silence of Solitude right here.
Yeah. I don't know how I would feel if it was just the library in general and not inside one of those rooms, because there's just a lot going on. Even if it's quiet, there's a lot of people walking. You're not really by yourself. It's kind of hard to focus in. So
Yeah.
at the same time, if you have limited options,
Right.
you got to kind of make do with what you've got.
Right.
Because really, without having to spend money, Like if you spent money to go off and rent a cabin for the day in the woods, fine.
Right.
But you have to
Right.
spend money. So
Right.
I've not had a great I've not had any inspiration for places to go in the winter. So
Right.
that may be a good option.
And if you guys have any ideas of like a good place, like an indoor place in the wintertime to have what we're talking about, or maybe you do practice silence and solitude, like, well, you know what I've done is, and it's cost effective or free, put that down in the comments because that would be helpful to us and to anyone else watching as well of trying to figure out the winter seasons because it's always hard. Because my go to is yours, Dustin. It's parks, it's nice places to be
Yeah.
with a nice view, and for me like the option to be able to walk around,
Yeah.
and that's my preference. But I end up not doing this practice a whole lot in the winter months,
Yeah.
and so I will say so like when I was when I was a pastor across the river and our church had its own building, I in the winter months I would sometimes practice it there. Even before maybe I even knew to call it that, or I I would have access to a church building, and so
Yeah.
I could go in when I knew nobody was there, and spend time in silence and solitude. So for those that are on the ministry side of things or pastor side of things, sometimes there's building access to that can make that more feasible too. Now, there is another option, which is it's more. This would be more applicable to like if you have a family. Is you could plan it to where there's something for your family that they're going to go do, and you have the house to yourself.
Yeah.
Now, once again, this is not ideal because you'll find something to do at the house probably instead of silence and solitude.
Right.
When you go somewhere, you leave a lot behind, whether
Yeah.
it's the TV, whether it is some books that you'd like to read, or whether it's work that you have to do on the house, or like some other side project, or you
Right.
see that pile of paperwork that you needed to go through. Like, there's too much at home. But once again, if you're limited on options and you need something that is cost efficient, that's another option too. If you have a family, I was just realizing that for some if the rest of the year, regardless, this is just kind of a side note. We didn't really talk about this. Would you agree you don't recommend doing it at home? Like if you like, that's not like let's say like you're not married or like you don't have a family.
I still wouldn't
I
do it at
still
home.
wouldn't recommend doing it at home, right?
No. No, there's
Yeah.
it's hard enough to be disciplined to leave your phone in the car and go somewhere. If you're at home, there is just unless you're a much more disciplined person than the average, it is not recommended. You have to go to a lot of extra work
Yeah.
to make sure that you don't do anything at home that would just distract you.
And I don't think that I've tried it at home. My wife tried it at home once, and I took all the kids out of the house.
Yeah.
And let's just say it didn't really work. It didn't really work for her. And yeah. She's done the coffee shop thing with headphones on. I've done that, but not for silence and solitude. Like if I need to get
Yeah.
somewhere else to get some studying done, then I can put headphones on and I can read and I can write and I can get in the zone really easy in any type of space. I could be I could be at an airport. Like it wouldn't matter. Like I could get in the zone.
Yeah.
But
Put in
that's
some
not
lo-fi music and just
exactly.
yeah.
and that works for me. But that's not silence and solitude is the problem. Like
Right. Right.
it ends up being something different
Yeah.
than what we're talking about.
So, yeah, if you have any ideas, let us know in the comments because
Yes.
at the moment it's library, home, coffee shop, and none of those are ideal.
None of those are ideal. I'm going to tell you
But once
this.
again,
We have a lot of winter ahead of us. I might try soon. I might try that library like the now that I know that they're in there, like these study rooms, because I don't know how long you're allowed to even rent them out. Like, I'm assuming that they're free, first of all, because it's like a space to read in or to study in. So I'm assuming that they're free. I shouldn't assume that, but I'm assuming that they're free. But the second thing is, I don't know if there's a limit on how long you're allowed to have the space. Like, I'm assuming you can't just rent it for the day, especially if it's a free space. But I don't know if it maxes out at 1 hour or maxes out at 2 hours or. So I'll try to find the data on that too. And if I get a chance to do that, then we'll talk about it here at some point. We'll talk about if that worked or if that was any good, because that'll be an interesting thing to see. Because I need to find a regular winter routine for Silence and Solitude that I haven't been able to find.
So, outside of winter, and trying to figure that out, what are some helpful practical things that we could share with someone who has never entertained this idea? This is all new.
Yeah.
Maybe this would be a good place to start. Would you recommend jumping into the deep end of the pool? Would you recommend doing these shorter bursts? I have my own feelings towards that, but I'm curious how you would go about it. If someone came to you and said, "Hey, Caleb, what would you recommend?" Would you tell them to take it slow and easy, or would you tell them to jump in?
Well, it depends what we mean by jump in.
Yeah.
Because that would be different for different people, even when we say that.
Exactly.
So like in the first half of our conversation, you talked about how someone like a pastor like Matt Chandler, who has the day.
Yeah.
And he's talking like 24 hours where he's gone and not available type of a thing. Like he's gone for literally a day. That would be the deep end of the pool. Like I've never done that. Like that's that's the deep end of the pool. What I would say is the first time trying to jump into extended Silence and Solitude, personally, my recommendation was plan 3 hours the first time. Now you could plan longer. What I'm saying is don't plan for less than 3, because the first part will be the hardest part if you've never done it before. And you'll be shocked at how long it takes you for your mind to wind down. You'll be shocked. That being said, once you get into like the listening part and the praying part of your time, that might go quicker than expected. Yeah. So what I would say is, if it's your first time diving in, schedule 3 hours so that way nothing's going to get in the way, right? But what will happen is you'll spend an hour to an hour and a half trying to quiet your mind, more than likely. But then you have another hour and a half on the flip side of that.
Right.
And maybe after 30 minutes, you're like, okay, like, I'm done. Like, I don't... And I would say don't feel bad about that. Be glad that you finished and that you didn't run out of time. It goes back to the whole concept. Like, you accomplished what you set out to accomplish. So, like, don't feel, like, guilty if, like, man, I've listened, I've prayed. Like, I don't...
Yeah.
Now what? As far as first time, I think that there's a sense in which, I think the first time that I did it, I once again, it was either 3 or 4 hours the first time that I did it. It took me way longer to quiet my mind than I expected. When I hit the wall of like, now I don't know what to do, because this is still a new practice for me, and I've never tried being quiet this long or listening to the Father this long or praying this long, is I tried to embrace it and stayed longer.
Yeah.
If you're not able to do that, I totally get it, and don't feel bad about it. Just call it a day. It's fine. But I would encourage you before calling it a day is when maybe you weren't as quiet as you thought you were. See, maybe you thought you reached silence, but you really didn't yet. And that 30 minutes of prayer time you had was more noisy than you realized. So,
Yeah.
when you think you're done, take a breath, sit down, and just be quiet. And embrace it. Embrace the quietness of that moment. And listen.
Yeah.
That's what I would say for your first time. Once you hit this wall of you think I can't go any further, then I would say, hey, if you got to call today, I totally get it. But before you do, one step further and push even further into the silence. And I'll think that you'll find that there's more there.
Yeah. Yeah. I one thing just to add to that, I would argue that if you're hitting a wall, that's just the wall of you trying to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
The wall might be boredom.
It could be. Sure.
Too.
Yeah. The wall is, okay, I've done everything I know to do. Now what?
Yeah.
And part of this silence and solitude is resting in I'm not doing anything, I'm just listening.
Right.
And that may be very awkward and weird, especially if you're a person that's like checklist, task, get things done.
Right.
It's going to feel very counterintuitive to just sit there and not do anything. And so if you hit the wall, I would argue that is an invitation into what God has on the other side of that wall.
The wall is an invitation.
It is.
That's great. That's a great one-liner right there, Dustin. So remember that. Your first time going into Silence and Solitude, you probably will hit a wall, but think of the wall as an invitation to go in deeper, not as the end. Yeah. But once again, I want to caveat that with, even if you do that and you're still like, you're done.
Yeah.
That's fine. Try again next month. Like, it's like, go again. It's the same thing with all the other disciplines of you plan a fast and it just doesn't go the way that you expected. And I don't even mean experientially. I just mean like you didn't even get to spend time with Jesus the way that you intended.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So maybe it just didn't quite go the way planned. Don't give up on fasting just because that one time didn't quite go the way that you hoped. I'll say that the last time I went Silence and Solitude, it was really cold. It was colder than I realized, and so the wind was really kind of miserable. And I was trying to do an outdoor Silence and Solitude, and it was too cold. And so I shut down early, like way earlier than even what I wanted to do, because I couldn't bear it. Like I just couldn't. Yeah. Like it was, I had a bad location. It wasn't, and I didn't have a way to like shift into going somewhere else. So I called it a day, and I got to spend time with the Father, but not near as much as I had wanted. And so, but don't let those things like prevent you from trying again or thinking that it doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
This is why I like the idea of calling the disciplines practices. Like we're practicing this. Like there isn't it's not like you did it wrong necessarily. It's just you're practicing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I keep beating the same drum over and over and over again, but the purpose of Silence and Solitude is not to check off the box of having silence and solitude.
There, I did it.
The goal is to spend time with God, because as we've already discussed, when we abide with Him, we produce that fruit. We become more like Him.
Yep.
And so whether you feel it or not, whether it was the mountaintop experience that you would hope it would be, whether it was just, I don't know if any of this worked. Like, it doesn't matter. You're getting into this rhythm and routine of consistently making time to spend with God. And if you were to do that, you look back 2 or 3 years later and you just look over what has transpired and you'll see fruit. You'll see things that have changed. You'll see that there was a slow, steady progression over time that has paid dividends. And you're not going to get that mountaintop feeling experience where you and God have a conversation every single time. There's just going to be days where it doesn't. And it's just, I love how you brought in, a date with your spouse on the end of the last part here, that it's just like a normal relationship. There's just times where it's just kind of, dare I say, average.
Sure.
It's just not always going to be the greatest, but that's okay. It's a relationship. It's part of the process.
It was interesting. I felt like I should have brought up the dating example earlier, because it's another way of even differentiating like our daily walk with God as opposed to like these extended times of getting away with God. Is if you only do the extended and not the daily, the extended isn't going to really help that much.
Yeah.
Just being honest, like it's just like it will be helpful, but like then you'll go back to not spending time with Jesus, and it's like, so it's just kind of awkward. So that'd be the same way with your spouse. It's like, if you only check in with your spouse when you go on an intentional date together, and not daily check in with your spouse and communicate with your spouse, like that's a strained relationship.
Yep. Definitely.
And your date isn't going to be very much fun, or an enjoyable experience, because that's the one time that you're checking in. And that'd be the same thing with our walk with Jesus. Like if that's the only time we're checking in, it's just there's a lot more we're going to have to be working through than like we've been working through this all along. And then so that would be another difference, a way to differentiate the two.
I have a question. So someone's listening to this.
I hope so. If you're still here, if you're still here, hit the like button, comment below with a timestamp. I'm still here.
You made it through all the episodes, all the technical issues, all of it. You were here.
You're still here. Thank you for listening. If we have a listener, thank you. Thank you for listening. Sorry. Go ahead and ask your question.
I would say if someone is listening to this and they are saying, that's great that you guys have the option to spend hours. I don't have that, but I want to practice this. What is a direction? What is the next step that they could take? Even though it's not large scale, is there something that we could point them to practice this if they have minutes as opposed to hours?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think you and I actually talked about this before, not on this show, in an interview that I did with you on my podcast before. And when you're talking about trying to practice silence and solitude in a way that's different than your daily prayer and scripture reading, and yet but it's still short. It's still a small time. Once again, the ideal is long, but let's say you literally don't have it, right? In the past, in the tradition that I grew up in schooling and everything, they would just say that you're lazy and you find time for what you want to have time for, and shame on you. Find the time. Okay, we're not gonna do that here. So, so one of the ways that we presented that in a practical way, I think, Dustin, was once again, might not work as well in the winter season. It could potentially, but maybe it's even going to your car for 5 minutes. Yeah. So you're by yourself. and you have the silence part, and maybe you don't have the time to unpack everything right now, but you're going to be quiet and you're going to be alone with the Father. Maybe you'll say some things, maybe you won't say anything. But that is practicing it in a microcosm. It's like, okay, I'm going to take the principles of this idea and push them into this one moment, because this is when I can.
Yeah.
This is when I can do it.
Yeah.
Maybe that is right before you leave to go to work, and before you start driving, right? In the winter, you got the heat running, so you're warming the car up, but you're going to embrace 5 minutes in the car before you pull out the driveway. Or it's once you get to work and you're going to sit in the parking lot for 5 minutes before then. Or maybe you work from home, or maybe you're a stay-at-home parent. All those different so that's always somewhat of a viable option for you to embrace. Now, if you have little kids at home, maybe you can't just step out into your car and leave them alone in your apartment or your house. We're not recommending that. So you have to do it in a safe way. So basically, that's one example. But you can be creative, is the point. Like, if you have little ones at home that aren't in school and that you're taking care of, then maybe it's during their nap time.
Right.
And I get it. You need a nap too. Totally understand that. But it's like, or maybe you have laundry to do or whatnot. It's just saying, in the middle of whatever's going on at home, what that would look like if you can't set aside this longer time is 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Wow, this is actually a quiet moment. I'm just going to be in the presence of the Father. And I think that's what I would emphasize in this miniature version of it. I would emphasize listening prayer is what I would say, as opposed to us having a lot to say. And you can. I'm just saying that's what I would encourage, is embrace the quiet. Once again, exception, maybe even put some worship music on for this type of way of practicing it. The point is, this is a tool. So if this tool that we're talking about isn't available for you in this season, hey, here's a similar tool that's trying to accomplish the exact same thing. We hope one day you can use this one, but this one, once again, another way to be with Jesus, another way to be like Jesus, and embracing this in that way. Is that kind of what you would say, or do you have any other thing to add to that?
I would say that, I would agree with everything you said. I would say that there may be also times where you just got to pour your heart out to God. Maybe you're just going through something and you just are super overwhelmed, and you take that 5 or 10 minutes, and the first part is you just telling God exactly how you feel. Trust me, he can take it. Maybe you're mad at God. Maybe you're, upset at circumstances. And you just pour out your heart to God, and you just tell him, say, God, I'm frustrated. I'm overwhelmed. I'm mad. I don't understand what's going on. And then you listen and see what he has to say.
Yeah.
You can do that in 5 to 10 minutes. Like,
You can.
You can find that space and that time. So, if you're in a season where you can't spend an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, work on finding time throughout the day, 5 or 10 minutes. Just take it when the opportunity presents itself. And I would argue maybe it's an oversimplification, but I would argue that the more that you can practice the short bursts, the easier it is on the long ones. The more that you practice how to calm yourself, quiet your mind, the easier it can be on the long ones. Now, just with anything, it's different, a short amount versus a long amount. So there's different issues that'll come up
Right.
or different challenges. But I would argue that the more that you practice it, even if it's a short amount of time, the easier it can be on the long ones, because you've gotten into this rhythm and routine of quieting your mind. It just it would be easier if you've been in a habit of doing so when you jump into a long term
Right.
versus that would be the only side note I would say, is if you're starting out, that may be a benefit to doing the short term upfront instead of jumping into 2 or 3 hours. I would still probably recommend 2 or 3 hours if you can, but that is a benefit, is getting into that rhythm and practice. That way, when you do go for a longer period of time, you've already experienced some of those. How do I empty my mind? What can I do to get alone and be with God? So those are the only things that I would probably add to it. I did want to just bring that up though, because while we definitely would recommend having the long period of time, there may be people who can't, and I didn't want
Yep.
to leave them out of this.
That's really good.
And there may be people who can take 2 or 3 days. Go do that. That would be.
Right.
I've never done that. I've heard people who have, and it has been very helpful for them. But wherever you're at, you can practice this discipline, whether it's short, whether it's a mid, or whether it's multiple days. Once again, we're spending time with God, and
Right.
no amount of time spent with God is wasted.
Yep.
It's whether it's 5 or 10 minutes, whether it's a couple hours, whether it's a day, it all is going to help mold you and form you more and more into his image. The more you can, the more often you can, the better. But we're all in different seasons, so we got to take what we can get.
Absolutely. No, it's really good. I think that's helpful. And our intention throughout this whole series of videos in regards to talking about spiritual disciplines so far is for these to be practical for anybody, while looking forward to doing them fuller when not the opportunity arises. And so there's a broad spectrum there, right? And so that's why I think even like when we talked about fasting, once again, well, I made an argument from, I think biblically it's mainly food, the in the strictest sense, that, but maybe for you in your season, because of where you're at or because of health reasons, whatnot, hey, it starts with, I'm fasting from this today. I'm fasting from this for a week, or I'm choosing to fast from this for a thing because I want that out of the way so I can be closer to Jesus, right? And so all of these things are meant to be in a sense of, like, when we're talking about scripture reading, it's not like, all right, you have to read through the whole Bible the next 30 days, right? So more recently, Dustin, I've been encouraged or reminded, like scripture reading, for instance, is of embracing smaller segments of scripture. As far as in regards to me spending time with Jesus, of embracing the meditation of smaller sections of scripture has been a helpful reminder to know that that's okay. Like, I don't have to like input all this information, right? So things like that. Some prayers are shorter than others. Like, sometimes you drop out of bed and it's like, God, help me through this day. I'm tired. Amen. Right? Like, sometimes it looks like that. So don't, in all the examples that we're giving and all the examples of what is better, don't just say, well, I'll do that when I can do the fuller one or the bigger one, right, or the better one. No, listen. The point is to spend time with Jesus and to be like Jesus. So use the tools that are accessible to you currently in your current season of life in order to do those things. Don't compare yourself to other people's rhythms and what they're able to do and what they're able to practice.
Yeah.
I think that's really essential for all of our conversations, really. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I think we're out of time. Any
too.
any final thoughts there, Dustin, or is that it?
No, I think that's it. Curious to see how next week goes.
Is it what I think it is?
Yes, it is.
Are we gonna say? We're just gonna say that. We're just gonna say, is it what I think it is?
cut the video right there. Is
Cut
it
it.
what I think it is?
I could actually probably do that. It'd be fun.
It's we haven't saved it for last because there's one more after it.
There is one more after it.
It is. If there is a controversial one, this would be it.
This is if there is a yes, yeah, yeah, and
Sabbath.
yeah, and it's also people probably, especially those who are working really hard and are in a really crazy busy season right now. This also could come across as the most like crazy type of like, what do you mean? Like, how's that even an option for me? Like, out of all of them too, I think is also, it could be even offensive to some to think like, wait, can you even consider doing that? Like, that's an option for you? Does that make like, so that'll be good and important for us to lay out the practical things for that as well.
Yeah.
All right, man.
We'll see you next time talking about Sabbath.
Yep.
Let's do it.
Well, we were going to record it, but I'll be busy Sabbathing and I won't be allowed to use technology during that time. Okay. Sorry. Just kidding. All right. See you guys in the next one.
See ya.